right, so this is the second part of our Chapter 3 lecture. This is going to be focusing more on reliability and validity. So why would we want something to be reliable when using it to measure variables? Well, it's pretty simple. We don't want something to be unreliable, right? Well, reliability refers to the consistency or stability of a measuring instrument. If a measure is reliable or has reliability, we would get the exact same measurement every single time we use it. Let's take a look at an example, and I'm going to refer to this throughout the entire lecture. There's a scale known as the Beck Depression Inventory that gives a measure of how depressed someone is. Over decades of research, this measure has been proven reliable because they get consistent and stable results using it over and over, and it's become kind of the gold standard for measuring depression. So we obviously have a way to know if a measure is reliable, and we do this by using what's called a correlation coefficient. This is a number between -1 and +1, and we typically aim for a gold standard of a positive 0.80. If an instrument has a reliability score of positive 0.80, what does that reflect? Well, that means that this measure is consistent and stable most of the time. Now, nothing is perfect, but a positive 0.80 is extremely good in terms of reliability of an instrument. So, there's the theme in this class, right? There are 4 types of reliability estimates that we can use for our measures, and we're going to discuss each one in detail. So first, we have test-retest reliability, and this simply involves administering 2 measurements to the same participants on 2 separate occasions. So let's say that I've developed a measure of statistics anxiety, and that determines how anxious statistics makes students in general. If I gave you all this inventory, say on Tuesday, and then gave you the inventory again on Thursday, your scores should be extremely similar, right? They should be consistent over time, which gets down to the test-retest part of this reliability. Next, we have the alternate form reliability, also known as parallel or equivalent form. And this involves using slightly different versions of the same measurement instrument. And this allows us to assess the stability and equivalence of items. So for example, you'll notice that some of your questions on exam 1 are very similar or very different versions of your quiz questions, right? So testing you on a concept on a quiz and then again on a test will give me an idea of how equivalent those different forms are. So they're getting at the same concept, but they're provided to you in different forms. Now third, we have split half reliability. And this is where we would administer half of a measure or a test at a time. So going back to our example of the Beck Depression Inventory. Say we give participants all of the even numbered items one day and then the odd items the next day. We would want to see if those items correlate with each other, right? So on either half of that measure, you should have consistent reliability. Now, the last type of reliability that we're going to talk about today is the inter-rater reliability. So this is very popular, especially when we're coding open-ended results. So just an example here, in my lab, we do vaccination research, and we have an open-ended measure of vaccination prior knowledge. So we ask questions like, how is a vaccination administered? Who administers vaccinations? What types of diseases are vaccines effective against? And participants are just given a box to write in their answers to these questions, right? So we have 2 researchers go through and code these responses and compare their level of agreement, right? So we have keywords or phrases that we're looking for, like what is a vaccination? Well, we're looking for keywords like a deadened form of the virus, It's an injection. It's administered by a doctor, a nurse, a healthcare professional. And then when we ask them what diseases do vaccinations protect against, participants get a score for how many correct diseases that they list. So if you just list, MMR and chickenpox, that's only 4 points. But say you go through and list off 10 different diseases that vaccinations protect us from, then you would get a 10. And we have 2 researchers go through and code these responses and compare their level of agreement in order to assure that we have inter-rater reliability. And again, we have a gold standard of 80% of agreement or higher. However, you have to be careful who your iterators are. So, for example, if you work really, really closely with somebody who's very familiar with the study or how you code, you may have too much agreement, right? So 100% agreement is not always a good thing. You do want some variability in your reliability. It's better if one of your raters is not necessarily a pro. So for example, I, as the senior graduate student in my lab, may do the first pass of coding this data, and then we may have an undergraduate research assistant do the second round of coding and compare our answers. That usually gives us a more real life measure of our inter-rater reliability. All right. So now that we've discussed reliability, we're going to move on to validity. So what is it and why is it important for a measure to be valid? Well, validity is a way for us to ensure that our measure is genuine. This helps us to be sure that we are measuring what we claim to be measuring. So remember when we talked about how we wouldn't take someone's body temperature using a weight scale? Well, that wouldn't be a valid way to measure temperature, right? But a thermometer would be a valid way to measure temperature. It's measuring what you claim to measure. So there are 3 types of validity in our textbook, and they all start with a C, so make sure that you are keeping clear notes. Try not to confuse the 3. So first off, we have content validity. So this is the extent to which a measuring instrument covers a representative sample of the domain of behaviors to be measured. And this typically involves expert knowledge in our field. So for psychology, a really great measure that has strong content validity is the GRE. So the GRE is the exam that psychology undergraduate majors, or those with their bachelor's degree, has to take in order to gain entrance into graduate school. So another example would be an AP Physics test is a great measure of AP Physics knowledge, right? There is a not so great example that's pretty popular, and that is IQ. And IQ is one that has very debatable content validity, as many may argue that an IQ test really isn't a great measure of intelligence. So with content validity, it helps us to ensure that we are measuring the content that we claim to be measuring. All right, so next we have criterion validity. So this is the extent to which a measuring instrument accurately predicts behavior or ability in a given area. And we have 2 types of criterion validity. We have concurrent validity, which refers to the extent the measure predicts present performance. So like an entrance exam, right? But then we also have predictive validity, which predicts our later performance, like a GRE. So these are the 2 different types you need to keep in mind. Concurrent predicts your current performance, and predictive does just that. It predicts your later performance. Now last, we have construct validity, and there are 2 types of construct validity. Now this refers to the extent to which a measuring instrument accurately measures the theoretical construct or trait it was designed to measure. So does your measure of happiness actually measure happiness? And again, we have 2 types here. So the first is convergent validity. Do we get the same result as other measures in this area, right? So our measure of happiness should correlate strongly with other measures of happiness in the field. So if we developed a new measure of depression, we would hope that it would have strong convergent validity and correlate strongly with the Beck Depression Scale, right? An already established, very reliable and valid form of measuring depression. Now, the second type of construct validity is divergent validity. So, did you get the opposite result, right? So, this means that your measure should not correlate with measures of other things, right? So, for example, your new depression inventory should not correlate strongly or positively with a life satisfaction inventory, right? Because those are two different constructs measuring two different things completely. So let's do a little practice problem here. Let's say that you've developed a new measure of religiosity. And how would you make sure it has construct validity? How would you make sure that it's reliable? Well, with this example, usually if we were in class, I'd have each one of you kind of go through and discuss this with me in person, but I'll kind of give it to you here since we are online this semester. So for construct, we could look at concurrent, right? We'd want to see if our measure of religiosity correlates strongly with already existing measures of religiosity. And we'd also kind of want to do the opposite, right? We'd want to make sure that it has divergent construct validity. We'd want to see that it does not correlate or weakly correlates with measures of, say, agnosticism, right? And for reliability, we could do something like test retest, alternate form, split half, or even inter-rater if it was an open-ended questionnaire. Now, the golden measure or the golden standard would be to have a measure that is proven to be reliable and valid, right? That's what we want, reliable and valid measures to use in our research. So as you can see, this is kind of a continuum here, different representations of reliability and validity and what our gold standard is. So you may have something that's reliable but not valid, valid but not reliable, not reliable and not valid. But this is the reliable and valid measure gold standard that we want. So that is the second part of the Chapter 3 lecture, just a little mini lecture on reliability and validity. Go back through your textbook and these lecture notes, and if you still have any questions on reliability or validity, just reach out and let me know.